talking about what happens if you forget to invite someone to your wedding. That can definitely be an extremely stressful point. You could, forget by mistake. You could forget because they were never on your list. You could forget, you could be in what we call wedding brain, and you just genuinely forget, right? So what do you do if someone is not invited to your wedding and you completely forget? You have to figure out what to do. How do you handle that? So first of all, if you have any questions, comments, please like, comment, or share below, and share this out to any friends or family members, coworkers who might get value from this. Also, I will be taking your questions, so if you have a question, please type it into the comment section below, and I'll be sure to answer it. So what do you do if you forget to invite someone to your wedding? Well, first of all, it depends on a lot of factors, right? It depends on who that person is. When did you remember or realize that you forgot, or maybe someone helped you remember? And then at what stage in the wedding planning process are you at, so that you can make the best decision for you and your fiance to move forward with, can you add that person or not? So first things first, who is that person? Like a friend of mine, actually one of my best friends from college, just went to a wedding this past weekend, and it was her cousin's wedding, and she said that her brother was actually not invited to the wedding, not because they don't like him or something, but because they genuinely forgot to add him to the guest list, and they had to scramble at the last minute to kind of shove an extra seat onto a table that was already full, or that was option one, or option two was that he had to go sit at the table of like the friends table in kind of like the back of the area, and he didn't get to sit with his family, right? So that it definitely happens, and it's not something that you can really help. You do your best to do the preliminary work to try and prevent it, but sometimes these things happen. So it depends on who you have forgotten, right? Is it a family member? Is it a coworker? Is it a friend? What kind of relation are you to them and they to you, in order to deal with how to assess the situation, right? So if it's a family member, it might be a little more difficult to go about handling that, because they are family, they're close to you, they might be a little offended, they might not be, and you might be fine, but the friend had the issue with the family table already being full, and they weren't able to fit the brother into the family table, so he had to sit elsewhere. So you might end up having to do something like that just to accommodate that person, or you might at the last minute have to kind of rearrange your tables and move some people around in order to make that happen and accommodate that person. And that's okay. Understand that doing something at the last minute in your wedding doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It just means that stuff happens, and we all make mistakes and have issues. So just accept it, roll with it, and trust me, you will be fine. So is it a family member? Is it a coworker? So for instance, when my husband and I got married, we sent out our invitations, relatively early, like 5 months prior to our wedding. And in that time, we actually got kind of close to one of his coworkers that when we sent out our invitations, we didn't know her very well, but we, went to a hockey game with her and got to know her a little bit better. And it was kind of at the last minute that we were like, should we invite her? Does it look bad that, we weren't originally going to invite her, and now we decided that we're going to invite her? And we had to kind of assess that situation together, my fiance and I, and, figure out what we were going to do about that. We didn't necessarily forget her. It just, she wasn't really on the list because we had gotten to know her closer to the wedding actually happening. So that could be a situation as well that you might be going through. So that's family and coworkers. If it's a friend, and again, it depends on how close your friends are, right? Some friends, they might be far away. You might not have seen them in a really long time. If you forget them, you know, it may or may not be so bad, really. It's certainly never good, but it might not be that bad, you know, if you're not really close to that person or you haven't seen them in a long time. But if it's a friend that's really close, the best way to do it, and I always believe honesty is the best policy, that just be honest with that person and say, hey, I have wedding brain, I have bride brain, I honestly forgot you. It's not anything that you should take offense to. It's just, I am so busy and overwhelmed and stressed and have so much pressure to put this wedding together and get things right that, you know, you may not be thinking of every single person in your life. And if they're a good friend, they'll understand. And if not, you know, that's okay. People come into our lives in seasons of our life, and everyone that we meet is either a lesson or a loved one. So, you know, you'll figure that out as you go. So that's friends, family, coworkers. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. Really, ultimately, it boils down to, can you make it work, right? And making it work, kind of like I said earlier, depends on when did you figure out that, you know, when did you realize that this person kind of was left out of the list? If it's early on, then it's not a big deal. You just kind of put their name back on the list and you'll be fine. So if it's early on, you're golden. You don't have to worry too much about that at all. But if it's later in the game, you know, if you've already sent the invitations out, it depends on when you sent them, right? So if you sent them a week ago and you just now realized you forgot somebody, no big deal. That's why you ordered a couple extra invitations. So don't stress about it at all. But, you know, if you sent out the invitations, all the RSVPs have already come back, but you haven't given your final numbers to the hotel, you might be able to sneak in an extra person or two. So it's not really a big deal. But the big cutoff really comes when your final numbers are due to your venue, for food, for seating, for the ceremony space, everything. So you want to look at when your numbers are due to each of your vendors and then assess from there. And honestly, if it's one person, it's not usually a big deal to have to add, like, you don't have to add one more slice of cake, right? Because there's inevitably going to be a person that won't eat cake. You don't really, if you're doing a buffet, you don't necessarily have to add one more person, you know, to the meal. They'll just eat because there's always leftover food in a buffet. But if you have a plated meal, you definitely want to make sure that you add that other person. So it really depends on when your numbers are due to your venues as to whether or not you can add somebody or not. And that depends entirely on how flexible your vendors are. Some of them might be really strict. Some of them, my venue, actually, my reception venue, they said that up until like 2 days before, I could give them a final count if I wanted to. So, you know, it really didn't matter whether we added somebody at the last minute or not. It really wasn't a big deal. The issue usually comes in this circumstance. The real issue comes from people being hurt that they were forgotten, and when your numbers are due to your vendors. So just think about that. And again, honesty is and will always be the best policy. So just be honest, you know, tell that person, I'm stressed out, I feel overwhelmed. It's nothing towards you. It's nothing that you did wrong. It's, you know, my fault for forgetting you, or whomever's, and they'll be understanding. And if they're not, they might not have been the friend that you thought they were in the first place, but that's okay. So Best of luck to you in wedding planning. If you are looking for more wedding planning tips, tricks, and ideas, you can head over to my website, myweddingplanningcourse.com, and check out some information there. I also have the Getting Started course, which will walk you, it's a 30 video course that will walk you step by step through every task you need to complete in order to get started with wedding planning. So I encourage you to check that out. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me. Until then, I'll see you next week. Bye.